You feeling stuck lately? Like life's passing you by? Get to know Maya.
Acronym My Ambition, Your Ambition.
Reconnect with your dreams, your goals, your ambitions. Find your motivation and start to live the life you desire. Explore the Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast at Maya-ism.com.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to episode 46 of Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition. Thank you for tuning in to episode 46, especially if you've been chugging away with me throughout this entire process. I appreciate it. So, of course, welcome to everyone. As I like to say that Maya is a forward-thinking way to think about mental wellness, mental health, because it's something that's such a taboo and people tend to not really think about it until they feel compromised. Well, the thing about it is I want people to begin to feel differently, to think differently about it, so that you don't have this idea that considering your mental wellness as part of your daily process shouldn't be taboo to you. So I take that, what I feel is a very salient topic, and I like to think I'm fresh, forward thinking about it, because so often they're those things that really sabotage our quest to have everyday happiness and fulfillment. What we do in this podcast is we work on, identifying the things that are our ambition and how to harness that motivation to help us yield the satisfaction and the success that we each seek in our daily lives. So just as much as you tune in every week and listen to the show, this is a journey for me as much as it's a journey for you. So with that being said, if you are a first-time listener or viewer, welcome aboard. Buckle up for safety, because occasionally it could get bumpy. There could be some unexpected things, hiccups. I may say something that really makes you think about a situation that you never really considered before now. Well, it's okay, because we can work through it together. And of course, if you are a returning listener or viewer, welcome back. You're more than familiar with, how we get down here. Like I always say, grab a pencil and paper so you can jot down something if it kind of makes you think about something, and you can go back and reflect on it. So just look at it as the next 60 minutes are all about you. So get comfortable, find that space where it can be quiet, that you can take in the episode and get focused. Like I always say, grab your beverage of choice. I'm doing water. I'm trying to be very hydrated, but wherever, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. And I love the fact that I've got listeners in Sacramento and in Geneva, Switzerland. I mean, the listening audience is really growing. And I like to say thank you to everyone for the support, because I really, really appreciate it. All right. So Maya, episode 46, being mindful about toxic positivity. So as we gotta go through the podcast, remember you can join the conversation by either typing your comments if you're watching Facebook in the comment section there. If you're watching via YouTube, you can type your comments there, and voila, I can share them on the screen and I'll read them just for our listeners. You can kind of hear what other people are saying about the topic in the episode. Got to do a couple housekeeping things, because, you got to do some shameless self-promotion through this stuff. Hopefully you're listening to episodes of Maya on Maya-ism.com. Remember, with every episode, there is a podcast companion, which means you go to Maya-ism.com, you click on the podcast resource section, and there's additional things I think that can expand the conversation there for you. Sometimes the video, most of the time it's reading material. I would always hope that you have subscribed to my YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube, search Maya-ism. I always say you're going to scroll past quite a bit of Japanese anime, and then you're going to get to me. You'll see my face, and to subscribe, like, and share the page. Now, if you're listening to this as a podcast on a different podcast platform, of course, I appreciate the support no matter where it comes from. So you can find Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google, iHeartRadio, Amazon Audible, Spotify, all those podcast platforms. You can find me there. Just search Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition, and then you can find episodes there. And lastly, get social with me. Hopefully by now you are following me on Twitter and Instagram, Maya_Akai, and Facebook, Maya Akai Presents. You can kind of stay abreast when episodes are coming along. And always like, subscribe, and share. If this episode maybe isn't going to hit home for you, you never know, it might hit home for someone else. And with that being said, the new segment that I launched about 2 weeks ago was Maya's mailbag, which I got lots of people who would ask me questions after an episode. And I said, something? That's worthy of the next episode. It really, to me, is a salient topic. So send me a virtual letter. If, an episode got you thinking and reflecting on how to navigate a difficult situation, or you're feeling stuck with working on getting to that best version of you, send me a virtual letter with your thoughts or questions to get inspired at Maya-ism. I'll read and respond. And if I think this is, this is podcast worthy, then I'm going to go ahead and maybe create a whole entire episode based on the question you posed to me in your virtual letter. Like I said, just go ahead and send me an email at getinspired@Maya-ism. So that's the new segment that's out there. And I've been getting emails and replying. And you know what? This episode today is kind of tied into a couple of the things where people struggle with difficult situations. I got a couple emails that question, like, I'm struggling with dealing with this. I've gotten a couple questions about grief, and I'm still working on that episode because grief is a heavy conversation, which FYI goes beyond the conversation of death. We tend to only associate grief with death when grief actually is really a definition of loss. Loss of life of a loved one, loss of a job, maybe loss of a friendship, loss of a relationship. But we tend to put grief in this small box and think it's only tied to loss of life, and it's not. So I'm still working on that episode, but I thought this is one that people might be able to get into. So of course, open up your toolbox. You know it's toolbox time, which means what do you always take out? Your EI, your emotional intelligence. That refers to your ability to perceive, control, and evaluate your emotions. It should be out when the episode starts. To be honest, it should have been out when you woke up this morning. You got to lead and progress through your day utilizing your EI. So if you're new to the show, you should know I always start out with that gentle reminder of never forget your EI is going to be the most important tool that we work putting into your Maya toolbox. And the saying and the quote that's going to overarch the entire year for me, because it's so important. Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Aristotle, Greek philosopher. I feel to me, it really speaks to so many of the things that we talk about, and it embodies the idea of mental wellness in a whole different perspective, because knowing yourself can give you mental platitude. So knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom, Aristotle, is going to be the quote that kind of overarches the entire year of all the episodes. So episode 46, let's get right into it. Being mindful about toxic positivity. And it was interesting because someone's like, how can positivity possibly be toxic? I said, oh, well, I guess this is really a worthy conversation. So you got to ask yourself, well, let's define. I'm really big on giving a framework and definition to things so that it has meaning to you and you can stay within the context of the conversation. So what is toxic positivity? Well, the article that I was reading, that for me, I really pulled a lot of the information for him. By the way, it is at Maya-ism. Just click on the podcast resource section and you're going to find it there. But I really found this article on verywell.com. It embodied all the things that you really need to know about toxic positivity. And ultimately, right out of the intro statement from the article, I'm just going to steal it, but I gave credit for it. Toxic positivity is the belief that no matter how dire or difficult a situation is, people should maintain a positive mindset. It's a good vibes only kind of approach to life. Verywell.com. Like I said, that article was at Maya-ism. Just click on the podcast resource section and you can read it. It was really, to me, a great article that for me, I really used it to go through putting together this episode because it hit on all points for me. And I thought, you know what? Why reinvent the wheel? Because these are exactly the things that I want to talk about. And hence I wanted to make sure that I shared the article as a resource for you. Thank you to everybody who checked into the show. Of course, Roburn, hello, aloha, calling in from Hawaii. I love it. See, I said there's people from all around the globe, just like Roburn. You can type a comment in the comment section and then guess what? I can then proceed to post it on the screen and share what you say. That's why this can be an interactive show. All right, so back to toxic positivity. So we've established what it is. It's trying to have that approach that everything has to be a good feeling, good vibe all the time. So let's talk a bit more about what I like to call then making it a false positive facade, because that's really what it is. So what does it mean? So ultimately, it's going through life, the fullness of the ups and the downs, the mountains and the valleys, and that's all part of personal growth. You have to know there's going to be good with the bad. And you have to stop and consider, what does it mean that if you stay down and tap out versus and let things go awry versus you put the situation in perspective, you allow the emotion to have depth and breadth. so that you can learn something from it. This gets back to conversations about comfort zones, which is episodes ago. But of course, I would tell you that I think it's very worthy of a listen. What's important about when you talk about your perception and perspective of things is it's important to allow yourself to feel the emotion that is presenting itself. And a lot of people struggle with that. But when you allow yourself to feel the emotion, it doesn't mean you have to surrender to it or give in totally or just tap out. See, that's the thing that's important about understanding that negative emotions do have a place and a space, and you need to understand what to do with them. So what's important is to not allow yourself to stay in an emotion for too long, especially if it's negative. I refer to this as emotional marinating, which is never a good idea, especially if it's negative marinating. So, okay. What is emotional marinating, you might ask? It's interesting because I've come to kind of coin some things, and this is something I'm going to call, it's a Maya-ism that things I just totally make up. So emotional marinating is a Maya-ism. This might be the second or third one I've thrown into the show, so I figured it is now worthy to be acknowledged when I do my show, my Maya-isms. So emotional marinating is when you stay in an emotion for an extended period of time and soak in the thoughts and the feelings that it manifests. Hence, it begins to impact your behavior because you've allowed it to soak in. So, when you marinate meat, it's the same thing. You marinate it because you want the meat to take on the characteristic of the flavor of the marinade that you've placed it in. Well, emotions are very similar to this. So you have to be mindful if you're feeling angry, if you're feeling, frustrated, if you marinate in that for too long and those thoughts and those feelings, it will then manifest itself realistically in your actions. So I refer to that as emotional marinating. Now, you like to give things short abbreviations like emotional intelligence is EI. Well, emotional marinating is EM. So you got some EI and some EM in your toolbox. So what's key to know is emotional marinating can be positive just as much as it can be negative. So positive EM would be when you have a good experience, you feel successful, you feel sexy, you feel confident, and you allow yourself to be immersed in those positive feelings and those emotions, which tend to yield a very outward positive actions. Let's be honest. When you feel good about yourself, it tends to put a pep in your step. You might have a brighter smile. You can tell as much when somebody is happy as when somebody is sad. So when you're having that emotional feelings where things are going good, that's a positive marinade because it exudes itself in almost every aspect of your life, especially if you're on the upward swing. So that would be the emotional marinating. On the flip side, you've got the negative emotional marinating, which we want to not necessarily avoid, but limit how much of it you actually do. So on the flip side of that coin, negative EM would be something bad or painful happens and you feel sad, you feel depressed, worthless, or disappointed in yourself. Those emotions elicit negative thoughts and feelings, let's be honest, and hence you manifest a negative mood or behavior. So sometimes something happens and you go to bed with a negative thought and you wake up on the wrong side of the bed. Sometimes we can wake up knowing something isn't going to be right today. And it could be something that manifests itself from the night before. So say you had a bad day at work. Say you had a fight with your significant other or a family member and it doesn't sit well with you, and it just it ruminates. You can't get over it. Now you're marinating in it. You ever hear that saying, it is not healthy to sleep with anger? Because anger can grow even when you sleep. Your mind never turns off. The human mind is one of the most important and amazing body parts, organs that you have. We probably do not take care of it the way that we should because we don't realize the ultimate value it has. When you go into REM sleep, rapid eye movement, and you go deep. Some people don't dream, which is interesting, but other people do dreams. And sometimes your dreams make sense and sometimes they don't. But your mind never stops working. So if you enter into a state of unconsciousness with negative things, chances are you're going to have unpleasant thoughts and probably have bad dreams. There's a correlation to it. So this is why it's important to reconcile as much as you can about your day. I always tell people, close down your day with just a little reflection of how it went. And if there was something you weren't happy about, think about why it was. what could you have changed? Why are you angry? And try to find some peace. This is why I encourage people to meditate. I know it seems silly, the whole, but I'm telling you, giving and clearing mental space before you retire to sleep is one of the best ways to try to refresh and reset yourself for the next day. So the Maya-ism, emotional marinating. There's positive and it's negative, and you really have to be mindful how much time you invest in the negative marinade. I'm not saying it doesn't have a purpose, but you can't stay into it, and you definitely can't get to the point where you are tapping out emotionally. Because you ever noticed, we tend not to celebrate our moments like we should. When things are good, we kind of celebrate the moment, but we don't do a lot with it. We don't think, I feel like things are up on the uptake. This is good. Now, what's next? What am I going to do next? But often when things are bad, we tend to go, this is awful. Then it turns into you start pulling stuff from the past and putting that on the table that either you didn't bother to reconcile or find peace with. But negativity has a way of just eliciting past emotions or bad things. And then we try to apply it to what's currently going on, which puts more things on you emotionally and mentally and spiritually. Negativity has so much power. I think people don't understand why you must learn to contend with it. You must learn to address it opposed to trying to push it away. And this is what toxic positivity is about. Okay, so let's have a real talk time. I think we're only maybe doing one in the show. We got, another toolbox. Think about a time you felt empowered. Everything in your life felt good. It seemed to be going in the right direction. The positive feelings were permeating in every aspect of your life. You just feel like you were on the uptake and you're like the sky was the limit. In most cases, when these things happen, we don't tend to build on them the way that we should. Versus on the flip side, I'm just going to be really candid because we're all adults here. When things are a shit show, because there's no better way to say it than that. When things are not going good, and when you kind of feel like you're like just spiraling down, that means you feel like things are a shit show, so to speak, then you start to really draw on those bad experiences. Ask yourself a question. Real talk. Do you take the time to reflect on situations as they have impacted you in the moment? I always say if you reconcile with things in the moment, opposed to trying to do them in large pieces, you tend to find more meaning. Now, sometimes you don't have that choice because maybe your journey for mental wellness requires that you have to do some back work, which means you can't maybe pull it in this moment. So you may have to pull on some past moments to reconcile those situations to be able to move forward. That's therapy work. Hopefully you have a therapist to work with you on that because it's key. But how many times have you thought when things are bad, well, what else could go wrong? That's when you're getting too deep into that negative emotional marinade. And the red flag for you should be when the pain and the discomfort gets to a point where it seems overwhelming. Now you've been there too long, which means you haven't stopped to listen to the self-talk. You haven't stopped to ask the questions that you need to ask to really figure out what's going on. So now, since we know that we don't often handle situations that we should like the way we should, let's go and open up our toolbox and put a couple things into your Maya toolbox. Let's talk about positive and negative marinades, emotional marinades, as a tool to use so you can understand the value of both. So obviously with positive marinades, here's the thing I want you to begin to do if you're not doing it, and we often don't. I want you to begin to fully enjoy, and I can't overstress this. I want you to begin to fully enjoy. I want you to embrace. I want you to celebrate your moments and successes beyond just that one little thing. Give yourself credit for the time and the energy that you've put into achieving something when you feel accomplished. And then when you do that, because I want us to learn how to be present in the moment, that mindfulness, I want you to, when you feel this sense of accomplishment and this sense of peace, I want you to stop and I want you to take in what it truly feels like to feel at peace and to feel happy. So then moving forward what it feels like and the place you want to be more often. You have to get familiar with it. Often we don't make the assumption that happiness should be a familiarity. We kind of make happiness too lofty. Everyday happiness isn't always like, sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns. Sometimes it's just simple peacefulness. But when you find yourself in a place of peace, take note of what it feels like. So when you start to drift away from it, you have an idea. I'm feeling like I'm drifting away from my point of peace, my center point, my balance. That's the tool I want you to learn, listening to that self-talk, feeling that positive energy. On the flip side, negative emotional marinade does have a place in your toolbox. Just like I want you to be aware of finding your place of peace and what it feels like. When you feel confronted with negativity, discomfort, or pain, don't try to shut it down. I want you to stop and to allow that emotion to be present and ask yourself these questions. Why is it impacting me the way that it is? That's key, because put the situation in front of you. Why is it impacting me the way that it is? What can I do about it? How much control do I actually have of this? But more importantly, I need you to allow yourself the moment to work through the problem. You don't have to rush it. Sometimes people feel like they have to resolve things really quickly. If you're asking these questions, this means that internal self-talk is working. Negative or bad experiences, and though they may make us cringe, have a purpose, and to teach us about our emotional range and boundaries. If everything was always perfect, you would never know anything about range and boundaries, and you grow from negativity, not totally from positivity. This is where you strike that emotional equilibrium. So when we talk about that emotional marinade, we're using that with purpose. So we're going to look and learn about our emotional range and boundaries. So what you then should be asking yourself is, you're learning about if you're feeling angry, if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling upset, how much is enough and how much is too much? Because a lot of times we push ourselves to limits, but we have no idea what our limits actually look like because we've never taken the time to know, this is my emotional limit in this situation. This is as much as I can take. This is kind of my demarcation point, my boundary, where my red flag, my spidey senses, Will Robinson danger goes off. And I go, we're getting a little too close to what is a boundary that's uncomfortable for me. And when we cross over it, here's my limit. This is where I stop. This is where I draw the line. This is where I go no further. These are the things you have to know about yourself. And when you allow yourself to use that negative emotional marinade, you learn your boundaries and your limits. Now, we all have our breaking points, and we have to learn to stop allowing ourselves to be pushed to the limits. And often we'll allow ourselves to be pushed to the limits to appease other people, and we sacrifice ourselves, only to realize it was a bad idea after the damage has been done. Okay, there are different types of toxic positivity. And there's really only two ways we're going to discuss it, because we're not going to make it like overly complicated. But there's two things I want you to think about of how toxic positivity can kind of creep in on you. One, when something bad happens, someone might say, just stay positive or look at the bright side. You know what? Those are meant to be words of encouragement. I know they are. And most people, when they say that, it's kind of no harm, no foul. They don't mean to really kind of be pushing on you what is really ultimately not really healthy for your emotional or mental well-being, because they feel like they're being supportive. So I know that that's like trying to be intentional in positive talk, but people have to understand that that type of sympathy can be dangerous. But you must know it, because when someone says that to you, ultimately what they're doing is they're not allowing you the space you need to deal with the frustration, the anger, the hurt, the pain, whatever it is that you are having in the moment. They're not allowing you to express what you need. And often when people say, just look on the bright side, it kind of shuts down your ability to really honestly and openly deal with what you're dealing with. So someone has the right intention, but it's not appropriate for you in the moment. So you need to be mindful when you hear that, like, okay, well, I totally get what you're saying, but there's some things I need to really reflect on in this situation before I can just move on without truly saying, yes, this has really this doesn't work for me. This has rubbed me the right way. And I could be looking for the silver lining in this right now, but that's not where I'm at. So I'll get there in a minute. But right now, I need to let myself express this emotion and let this anger out, because there is no place for anger in. Remember, we talked about episodes ago about how anger and stress can manifest itself physically and you can become ill if you hold too much in and you don't allow yourself to properly express yourself. That becomes debilitating initially mentally, emotionally, and then it can turn into physical issues. The other side to toxic positivity, again, when you express disappointment or sadness and someone tells you happiness is a choice, you can choose to stay in that, you can let that affect you, or you can move on. Okay, once again, this is someone who does have good intention, maybe not being empathetic enough, because with empathy, when you're truly an empathetic being, you will learn, okay, this person is sitting in a bad spot right now, but they're really impacted by this. This shook them to the core. They need to work through this. And what I don't need to do is try to give you an unnecessary pep talk right now. If you're going to walk the walk and walk in someone's shoes, then you have to know that they need emotional and mental space to be able to make that happen. So this response, again, there is some truth to it. I'm not going to deny it. We do choose our path to happiness, but what it does again is it negates the fact that in the moment you're feeling a negative emotion. It's real. Negativity, negative emotions, they're real. So don't treat it like it's abstract and it's not tangible. You know what you're feeling. And it's trying to discount it and make it seem like, well, you're choosing to be miserable. And, the bottom line is it's not good to try to negate negative emotions for the sake of putting on a happy face, because it really kills professional and personal growth. Being forced out of your comfort zone is called growing pains. And we tend to strive and grow when we are challenged. You know what they say, if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you. If everything is even keel and there's never a challenge, I would ask anybody, how would you actually expect that anything in your life would be different? And you ever notice when people never have adversity and when they're faced with it, they're not prepared, and how they fall to pieces? Because realistically, we have to prepare ourselves that sometimes bad things are going to happen. And here's the thing, sometimes bad things have happened to more people than others. That's just real talk. And some people can muscle through it and other people can't. But if you're never challenged to what it feels like to be uncomfortable, to feel some pain, to feel angry, when that emotion manifests itself, you're not quite sure what to do with it. This is why when you're raising children, you shouldn't try to subdue the pain and protect them from pain. And no, they need to learn what those emotions feel like, but then to help them to properly understand, you're angry. So why are you angry? Okay, let's talk about this and help them to navigate it. If you fail, okay, so you didn't do it this time. Why do you think that happened? You work through it. It's the learning experiences that help us to get to that best version of ourselves, and a lot of times people just don't want to be honest about it. So that's to me the two bases of the types of toxic positivity that you've probably at some point have come in contact with. Let's talk a little bit about how you're able to manage things when negativity happens. Because before I can legitimate tell you it's going to be okay, do this, do that, that's not really me being fair. Because sometimes we can be so emotionally overwhelmed that we don't know what to do with it. And processing your emotions, this is a big part of EI. So I understand this is a lofty conversation. So I want to preface this by saying now that if you're still doing the work, if you're still building your EI, you may not be dropping this in your toolbox right now. We're making you aware that it's something that as you're developing your EI, you should be like mindful of, wait, these are things that might combat me that I have to be aware of. That toxic positivity, I would have never thought that was a thing. So even if you're still working at a different level throughout the episodes, you don't have to feel like you got to process everything at the same time. And I want to make sure you know that, because I never want people to feel like they're being denied authentic support because they're trying to be present with others and not present with themselves, because everything here is about you. All right, let's take a quick break and we're going to come back and we're going to talk a bit about why you need to be aware of toxic positivity, because there's signs you could already be employing it. There's all this different stuff. And I want you to learn to be aware of, like, this is why you need to not let this consume you, because it can be a detriment. You're tuned into Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition. This is episode 46, being aware of toxic positivity. Sit tight, everyone. I will be right back.
I can't breathe. I have migraines, numbness, weight loss. I live with it every day. The illness that I'm suffering from is an anxiety disorder, and it deserves to be treated like any other illness. But it's not.
Please stop and listen, because this important message may directly apply to you or someone dear to you. Several thousand African American former full-time CPS teachers were unfairly terminated starting in the mid-90s and continuing to the 2000s. If you are one of those many former CPS teachers who was unjustly terminated, or if you are the immediate relative of a now deceased unjustly terminated former CPS teacher, you may qualify to participate in a lawsuit at no upfront cost to you. Please call 773-580-7183 immediately for more information. That's 773-580-7183. Do not delay. Act today, because time is of the essence. That's 773-580-7183. 773-580-7183.
When we come together, we bring the magic. When we stand together, we cannot be moved. We move and move. When we work together, we are a force. When we show up together, we show out. And when we band together, we are unstoppable. Join Cricket Nation in celebrating Black Music Month by supporting HBCU music programs.
Whether you're on the go or listening on your cell phone, tablet, or laptop, you can find the show in the iTunes, Google, and iHeartRadio platforms.
With all due respect, I believe this is going to be our finest hour.
Just search Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition, and get ready to be inspired and motivated to harness your ambition.
All right, everybody. June did wrap up Black Music Month. I wanted to play that commercial one more time. Great support of HBCUs who need support with their music programs. So make sure you go to Cricket Nation and support. You can donate to make sure that the fanfare and all that talent that comes from so many of those bands, we need to get music back in schools. So show your support. So though June is over, I want to play at least one last time, because you can still actually donate and support to the cause that Cricket Nation is actually supporting. So good stuff. All right. So episode 46, being mindful about toxic positivity. So you may ask yourself, so why do I need to be aware of toxic positivity? Well, the thing that's really interesting about it that most people don't realize is that the negative effects of not giving people the proper emotional space to deal with bad things has consequences. So for instance, it can be shaming. So I'm going to say these next couple things, and I want you to be mindful of if you have been a recipient of these things, or have you done this to someone else? Because sometimes we ourselves have employed toxic positivity, assuming that we were being supportive of the individual, not realizing that we were doing more harm than good. So this actual conversation can help you to begin to understand maybe how to interact with somebody when they're having a difficult moment, when they're really struggling with something. You think you're saying, yes, this is great, not realizing that you may be giving them a very conflicting kind of way to deal with a difficult situation. Welcome aboard, Vernon Furley, the Joker, aka toxic positivity. You must have saw the movie and felt some kind of compassion. No. Either way, but thank you for tuning in. Just like Verna, you can always share your comments via Facebook or YouTube, and I can click and share them on the screen. Okay, so the shaming piece. Here's what's interesting about it. When you tell someone that you make them feel guilty about how they're feeling, it's important to know that all emotions, whether they are positive or negative, deserve a space to be valid. So there's this approach about shaming that you may in turn kind of make a person feel like you can be positive all the time, and that's creating a false illusion, and hence they feel like how they feel isn't acceptable, and then they feel ashamed the fact that they're not regulating their emotions based on the social construct of be positive all the time. I love it. We have all these amazing sayings, grand risings and this and that, and it sounds great, but be mindful because I may not be in a grand rising moment. Let's just be honest. That's why it's important that you sit in your emotion and not in somebody else's. So you can always take the firm support of look on the bright side. It could be this, not right now. It's not right now. It's this. And I need to process this and be in this moment so I can learn something from this, especially from a negative standpoint. So be mindful about shaming people about feeling negative about a situation. Something else that's important is that shame leads to guilt. And a lot of people don't put this in context, in context because they feel like they're being sympathetic and supportive and they're saying a positive thing. But what's important is that when negative emotions are created, by you making someone feel that they aren't finding the positive way to deal with it, like you can choose to be happy, but you're not being happy. Now, again, there's truth into that statement, but it is important and it is imperative that you understand where a person is within that emotional journey. If they face a serious tragedy, I'll be honest, one of the hardest things to say to anybody is when you find out, for instance, someone has passed away. I have yet to find the words to say to someone besides, I'm sorry for your loss. I know this is difficult and I can't even begin to tell you how I feel. Allow yourself to feel what you feel and don't feel bad about it. When I had to go through my grieving, again, it's a process that is like nothing else that you know. So I often feel when people lose loved ones, it is the hardest thing to figure out what to say to someone. When people lose jobs or whatever the case may be, or go through a divorce and maybe they didn't want it, be mindful what you say to them because they have to be able to feel that emotion and don't make them feel guilty that they just haven't picked up and ran away with it. Because we have so many social positive norm things out there that I think is great. But this is why I say it's important that you distinguish between where you're at in your emotions versus where somebody else is in theirs. So when you make someone feel shame, then for some people, if they're not high on their emotional intelligence, their EI, then they start to feel guilty about it. So I think it's really important that maybe you've been a victim of this, or maybe you've done this assuming that you were being supportive, not realizing that you weren't giving the support that they need. Note something. This is where your EI and your EM come into action. Whether you are dealing with someone who's in a negative space or it is you, this is where you have to be able to perceive, control your emotions and understand what's going on, or somebody else's. And not just say, oh, it's going to be okay. Maybe it's not going to be okay right now. And if it's not okay right now, let me be in my right now and you stop trying to push me over here. Like I told you, there's a purpose to emotional negative marinate. You're not meant to sit in it for long periods, and it's not about tapping out, but it's about addressing the emotion and allowing yourself to be authentic in what you feel without feeling it's not okay for other people. These are tools. When you get slammed with emotional, something that's bad or negative, I want you to open up your toolbox, take out your EI, take out your EM, and be like, okay, what are these questions I'm supposed to be asking myself? Like, why is this impacting me like this? I'm feeling angry. Why am I feeling angry? Start to process the emotion by the situation and not just by the emotion. If you let the emotion drive you and you're in the back seat and you don't know where the destination is, that's when it becomes a detriment. Something else that people have to be aware of is avoid, and devaluing authentic emotions is never healthy. Like I said, negative emotions have a place. They help us to grow, to change, to evolve, to get to the best version of you. Because when you know what it feels like to fail, when you know what it feels like to disappoint yourself, when you know what it feels like to be so sad, remember I said, remember what it feels like to be in your happy space so you can know how to get back to that place. So trying to get a person to be void of how they feel is never healthy. You have to let these emotions, like I said, everything has depth and it has breadth. And you have to let it sit there to understand it so that you could grow. So maybe you've experienced this, maybe other people have done it to you. The other thing that people don't understand is why toxic positivity is negative, because it stifles your growth. If you never bother to have a negative emotion, you often don't know what to deal with it when you get one. And those are when people often can become very consumed. They become just decimated emotionally because they've never been pulled so far deep. And don't get me wrong, sometimes something will strike us in a way and we've never been pulled to the brink of where we're at. Seriously. And this is why having this internal dialogue with yourself is paramount. Like, this is really pulling me apart. Notice, for instance, when people, and grief is an entirely different thing. And as I said earlier, grief isn't just about physical loss. It could be the loss of a job. It could be loss of a relationship. Grief manifests itself in many ways. The key thing about grief is it means loss. And I will tell you that when I went through the hardest grieving I ever did when I lost somebody, I learned more about myself when I sat in my negative emotions. I learned more about fear. I learned more about uncertainty. But had I not been challenged, but don't get me wrong, if I could go back and change that, would I? Absolutely. But you can't. But I learned about myself in ways that had I not been challenged that way, I would have never known. Seriously. And so everything, even in its negative state, you can gather something from it. But I understand that in certain situations, it's hard to ask somebody to even remotely kind of be okay. But this is why I tell people there's no timetable on grieving, and you need to do it at your own pace, but make sure you're doing it in a conscious way so that it doesn't pull you under. Because the void that is often created in loss can either be filled with renewal of life and joy and peace, or it can be filled with negativity, anger, and sorrow. And if you feel that void with this, that is a spiral to nowhere. But I'm going to tell you something. That's a really hard cross to bear when you've lost someone that you love. And this is why when you're being supportive of people, you must be important in the dialogue that you have. But there can be personal growth from all loss if you open your mind to it. And that's hard. This is why grief counseling is important for some people, so they can get some insight into what they're feeling. But if we don't allow people to experience negative emotions, we stifle their growth. They don't get out their comfort zone. All right, so we've talked about why we need to be mindful of what toxic positivity is. Let's talk about signs that you are succumbing to toxic positivity. Because, a lot of times that people don't necessarily think that this is them. But you could be having or listening some patterns of behavior where you are subscribing to this maybe at a low level, not a high level. Some people subscribe to toxic positivity on a high level. Seriously. Do you find at times you feel guilty about being sad, angry, or disappointed? You have some people who legitimately will not let themselves sit in a situation where they have a right to feel angry or disappointed because they feel like, I got to keep a happy face. I got to keep going. Now, this doesn't mean that you're high on toxic positivity. It's just a red flag that you feel guilty about having negative emotions when negative emotions are just as natural and occurring as positive ones. It's all about what you do with them. That's key. 2, do you find you hide or disguise how you really feel? I refer to this as inward positive facade, which means you legitimately are struggling with your emotions, and opposed to addressing them, you disguise or hide them. You put on the happy face. You make sure everything's okay. You ever ask a person maybe who lost somebody, how you doing? Oh, I'm good. I'm okay. But deep down inside, they're really not okay. That's an inward positive facade. That's not good. Do you find you hide your true feelings behind optimism? You sell the silver lining idea. You go with the more socially acceptable approach, which is the outward positivity facade. So you're going to say all the right things, be that happy face. You're going to be like, yeah, you know what? Yes, I lost so and so, but I realized, I didn't have control of it, which is true because there's truth into maybe where this positive inward facade comes from. But what you haven't allowed yourself to properly do is reconcile the negative emotion. When you don't reconcile negative emotions, I want to tell you something. And a lot of people don't want to be honest about it. You're literally just creating a bigger issue down the road. Are you that person that downplays or brushes off problems or concerns rather than facing that they bother you? You got some people who just run from situations oh, it's no big of a deal. Like somebody legitimately hurt your feelings. You just were like, wow, I just can't believe that just happened. But you know what? Hey, not my fault. I'm going to do this. But you don't reconcile the idea that my feelings were hurt by this situation, because then here comes the internal conversation. Well, why was my feelings hurt by this situation? Why did it elicit that emotion from me? Why am I angry? Why am I hurt? And then you can process it and then move on and be like, but you know something? In the end, I'm kind of disappointed that I let it impact me that way, because ultimately it wasn't something that was in my control. Or here's one better. And boy, did I get this life lesson again just recently. Intentions and outcomes are different things in situations. You may have the best intention and the outcome may be opposite of what you ever expected. I'm going to tell you something and stand firm on this. When somebody brings something to your attention, it's important to own whatever it is maybe you've done wrong. Now, let's say that wasn't your intention, it's a misunderstanding. It's important that you acknowledge how the other person feels, to say, I'm sorry you felt that way. That was not my intention legitimately, but if that's what I created, I need to apologize for it. That's not where I was going. But I'm going to tell you something that's important, especially about toxic positivity. Do not let someone hold you hostage by their toxic positivity. I'm working up, I'm doing this, I'm owning my emotions, and yet they are trying to succumb and subdue somebody else to negative by making them feel bad. So once you reconcile something and you own it and you process it, move from it, and don't let other people pull you back in. Don't let other people pull you back in. You have no idea how many people have allowed themselves to get pulled back in. I haven't got to play this for a while, and now I can.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
I've been waiting to play that one again for a while, but it's true. Once you process a negative emotion and you understand why it impacted you, why it elicited the response from you, it's important to not letting people to keep eliciting that response from you. That's why it's important to actually deal with your negative emotions so you can get to the source of where they come from. And downplaying or brushing them off doesn't make them go away, which is interesting because you have a lot of people who believe they can wish it away. You can't wish it away, and I don't know why people think like that. You can't make things just go away and you think they're going to get better, or you have a genie in a bottle. You don't. You got to deal with situations as they present themselves. And the final thing I think is important, and I would say at one point before I really started to reconcile my emotions, I was guilty of this. That kind of, I would try to be strong and stoic, I would utilize the get over it or suck it up to pain approach to my emotions. There's no crying in baseball, and there's not, by the way. But that was my approach on things. All that I was doing was sidelining my emotions and creating bigger issues. So legitimately, when the emotional levee broke, I damn near drowned in it because I wasn't processing my emotions properly. I didn't deal with the negativity. I was downplaying that I was in pain. And the problem was, this was the outward facade I put out there to people. So people just kind of never really knew when I was suffering, or, because I'm one of those suffer in silence people. For a long time, I was like that. And people didn't realize that my burden at one point had gotten so heavy that I was legitimately struggling. And it took me doing the work of addressing, one, stop behaving like that. Two, don't be afraid to deal with your negative emotions. And I did. I really did. And it was hard. So if you find you're doing or employing any of these things, don't beat yourself up about it. Now you've put yourself on notice that you might be employing some toxic, positivity in your life, and you need to address it. So how can you avoid it? You know it's there, so how you can avoid it. Key thing, what they always tell you, when you know better, you do better. So make sure you acknowledge and then address your negative emotions. Like I said, we're allowed to have a little bit of negative, emotional marinade. We are allowing ourselves to, actually be able to process how we're feeling, what we're struggling with. We're giving ourselves that space. So first, the key thing is you must acknowledge whatever that emotion is. Once you acknowledge it, it doesn't help if you go, yeah, that elicits a little bit of fear from me, but then you don't do nothing about it. So the rule is you address it and then you can move forward. So you acknowledge it, and addressing it is so important. The key thing too is learn that you can feel conflicted and confused, and it's okay to feel more than one thing. It's interesting how we can be in situations and you might say, okay, this situation happened and I feel bad about the situation, but in the same token, I also feel some relief. That's one of those engaging situations you want to ask yourself, okay, why do I feel guilty about this? But what is the sense of relief? Process those things and allow yourself to know that sometimes in certain situations, you just might legitimately feel conflicted and it feels odd. And a lot of people don't know what to do with that. The other thing is give yourself emotional space and time. Be honest and realistic about how you feel versus what you think you should feel. Get past the idea of trying to craft your emotional, kind of responses to things based on what you think people expect for you to do. That's that outward facade that you need to learn how to pull off. Give yourself the emotional space and time to be honest with yourself, because none of this works if you're lying to you. You need to start to be honest with yourself. And when you're honest with yourself, the realities of situations can come through. You might have to say, okay, I'm gonna have to be accountable for this because to a degree, this is partially my fault. But at the same time, this piece was out of my control, or that wasn't my intention. And you move from that. But give yourself the time and the space to work through it. You're not on anybody else's timetable except for yours. So this is why, you don't have to feel that you always have to say the right thing, put on the happy face for people to make people feel like things are okay. It's okay to not be okay. So maybe your grand rising is not today. Don't beat yourself up on that. Like I love cliche sayings all the time. And I do believe in repeatedly giving yourself positive affirmations. I am good enough. I am smart enough. I am a kind person. I am intelligent. I can do this job. I'm all about the positive affirmations that literally direct back to you and go back to the core of what you feel is missing with you as you work towards that best version of yourself. Cough moment. Sorry. I had a cold. So sometimes my throat gets dry. Sorry about that. It's still there. Okay. And everybody watching me is watching me like tear up as I'm coughing up a lung. It's kind of funny. I'm sorry. But this last piece is really key. Give yourself that emotional space. To do what you need to do. So, with all that being said, now that Maya has coughed up a lung, and you can see me tearing up if you're watching the video, I thought I was going to make it through the show without getting dry throat, but I didn't. But at least I was towards the end before I had a coughing fit. Just know that toxic positivity denies you access to the authentic support that you may need to cope with things that you are facing. Negative emotions have a space and a place in your life. It's part of what's going to help you to grow as a person. Um, if you just tuned in, I'm not crying. I'm having a coughing fit and I'm tearing up. So I swear I'm not having a breakdown in my podcast. As I was saying, denying positive emotions doesn't give you access to be authentic and to grow into who you are. You must learn to understand when you're impacted by the things that draw or elicit negative emotions from you. Because remember, if the negative feeling is there, the thoughts and then the actions follow. So if you don't learn to understand the things that are triggers for you, or what makes you unhappy, or why something made you so angry, if you push it down for the sake of saving face or put on the happy face thing, all you're doing is allowing it a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, or sixth time to represent itself in your life and to be challenged repeatedly. If you do the work when something presents itself, then more likely than not, you're going to be okay. But let me say this, because I don't want to mislead you. As you grow emotionally, you will find navigating negativity becomes more manageable, but not necessarily easier, because you never know exactly what emotion is going to be elicited and how you're going to feel. So it's important that the better you are to perceive how you feel, when you feel those negative emotions coming, you will do better with trying to actually manage them. So, with that being said, I'm actually going to wrap the show early before I legitimately cough a lung up and it ends up on my laptop. Thank you for everyone with your patience. I did good till I got to the end. My dry throat is crapping up, but I enjoy the fact of what everybody shares. Remember, there is the new episode of, not new episode, there's the new, it's a part of the podcast. So there's a new segment of the podcast called Maya's Mailbag. So remember, if this episode kind of gives you a thought or something, it gets you thinking or reflecting on how to navigate a difficult situation, or hey, if you're feeling stuck with working out or getting to the best version of you, send me a virtual letter with your thoughts or questions to getinspired@maya.com. So like I said, you can send me a virtual letter at getinspired@maya.com and I'll read through it. And who knows, it might be the next episode, or I'll say, hey, this week in the mailbag, this was a very specific question that was asked. I'm going to address this before the show, or maybe it is the show. It all depends. So like I said, you can just send me a virtual letter to getinspired@maya.com. So that's a new segment that I'm rolling out to kind of address more and more issues that people present. So as always, thank you to everyone for listening to this episode. As I said, the whole purpose of this podcast is to help you to identify your ambition and harness that motivation to help you to acquire the success and satisfaction you seek in your life. Remember, you can always find episodes at iTunes, Apple Podcasts, the Google Play platforms, as well as you can listen via Maya.com, my website. Remember, there will be a podcast companion to go. Thank you. Yes, my dry throat, it was awful. Hopefully you will actually go to the website, because I did post 2 articles that I think really are great supplemental pieces to this about toxic positivity. The one by verywell.com really resonated with me, and I used it a lot throughout this episode. So I would encourage you to go to Maya.com, click on the podcast resource section, episode 46, and you can, check out those 2 pieces of supplemental things I put there. But like I was saying, as always, you can find me on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, iHeart, Amazon Audible, Spotify. Just search Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition. Of course, you can always find episodes at Maya.com, as well as make sure you subscribe and share my YouTube page. Just search Maya Akai. You're going to go through a whole bunch of Japanese anime, and then you're going to find me. So make sure you subscribe and share as well. As always, I appreciate the support I get from everyone. And I'll always stick with and say, until the next time, remember, your present becomes your past, and your future becomes no more. So live every day to the fullest, because every day has more meaning and richness, and you never know what the next day might be. All right, everybody, be well, stay safe, and here's one better. Be absolutely amazing. I'll see you next week.
Get inspired, get motivated with Maya-ism and the Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast.
Something that I take pride in is trying to be forward thinking, thinking outside the box, challenging myself. And as I challenge myself, hopefully I challenge you.
Find Maya on Twitter and Instagram at Maya_Akai. On Facebook at Maya-ism Presents.
We're going to talk health, wealth, fitness, mental health, financial, lots of different things that can empower you as you seek out the ambition that you're pursuing.
Or get everything Maya at Maya-ism.com.